Thank you very much. Dear organizers, dear colleagues, I'm going to start with my lecture with two short examples. Then I'm going to talk about two interesting personalities, Adolf Strauss and Lajos Talóczy and their work. Okay. And finally, I would like to connect my lecture to yesterday's lectures, namely the agrarian exhibition of 1885, which has many different readings, and I'm going to talk about it. Explorers and travelers in the 18th century often claimed that they carried out scientific research and tended to publish their works in the form of scientific products. But the existence of a scientific output does not mean that their work did not have other aspects. For example, Felix Kanitz received 6,000 forints, that's an annual salary of a minister, for his trip to Bulgaria from a secret extraordinary fund of the Hungarian government after his joint trip to Vidin with the consul in Belgrade, then Benjamin Kallai. It is a very interesting case because Kallai acted as an official of Austria-Hungary, whereas the secret fund was supported by the Hungarian government, especially it went through the hand of Andrássy, but Andrássy was then Hungarian prime minister and not an imperial official. We also know that Kanitz later sold his sketches of maps to the Russians in 1877 with the knowledge of Vienna during the Great Eastern Crisis. The second example. Sometimes scientific activity gained political significance later when the significance of this activity became important. The companion of the famous albanologist von Hahn, the Viennese chemist, engineer, photographer Dr. József Székely, photographed the Balkans military facilities accurately, with 2 hours of exposition time, with the consent of the Ottoman authorities. Whereas 30 years later, in the Montenegrin-Austrian border, signs were set up prohibiting such activities. However, Székely's pictures were published only decades later, in 1889, in Spiridon Gopčević's famous volume, Promoting Serbian National Goals. This is a good example of the secondary political utilization of scientific activity. The question naturally arises, how could Gopčević got free access to secret material kept in the Austrian Academy of Sciences if he was only in Serbian service? The answer is that he was also paid by the Austrians as well. So we have a secondary utilization of scientific activities for political purposes. And of course, we have to talk about the cooperation and the rivalry between the Hungarian and the Austrian counterparts of the Austro-Hungarian state. It is very interesting to how much extent was it a rivalry and when it turned out to be a cooperation. For example, in 1881, there was a great imperial Austrian expedition to the Balkan Peninsula, led by Eduard Süss and Hochstetter. Both are well-known famous Austrian scholars. And the question naturally arises why the Hungarians decided to repeat this expedition 4 years later in 1885. Was it purely scholarship or political penetration, or does it have an economic background, for example, industrial espionage? It is very interesting to look at the participants. One of the participants of this famous expedition of the Hungarians was György Endre, who was the editor of the Nemzetközi paper for economic theories, and György Endre was also an economic theoretician of Benjamin Kallai as well. The second participant was Bertold Weiss, who was a banker, in fact the brother of Manfred Weiss, the famous entrepreneur. The third one was Adolf Strauss, very interesting personality, and Béla Inkey, a geologist, and György Réti, an archaeologist, also participated. The personality of György Réti is important because he was a close friend of Lajos Talóczy, who also participated in the discussions in 1885 what to do during this expedition. This expedition aimed to collect industrial artifacts from all over the Balkan Peninsula and to set up an eastern pavilion where all these stuff will be shown for the Hungarian public. But the reason was not only scientific. Other topics were also discussed during this discussion. For example, that the consular system needs to be renewed because consuls of Austria-Hungary do too much diplomacy and no economic activity, thus they cannot promote the economic penetration of Hungarians into the Balkan Peninsula. There are no institutions in Hungary to preserve these Balkan industrial samples to be collected. How can the Hungarians that way compete economically with Vienna, with Austrian penetration? So they decided to establish a new museum, but in 1885 only a pavilion was set up. They decided to establish an academy, a purely Hungarian academy. This was the Academy of Oriental Trade, where, for example, Strauss taught. These institutions all existed in Vienna, so these were parallel institutions. So the question naturally arises again, to what extent was it a Hungarian initiative? What extent did it serve, to what extent did it serve imperial goals? On the right side of the picture, you can see excerpt from the instructions of the Hungarian government what artifacts to collect during the expedition. So we have official documents, and these documents were published by one of the participants, Adolf Strauss, in fact, who was a well-known scholar and a military officer as well. He was born in a Jewish family. He served many states, many powers. He studied at the Ludovik Academy, served in the general staff, studied law in the University of Budapest. He focused on the ethnography of Balkan countries. He served in a Hussar regiment together with the future Bulgarian ruler Ferdinand during the occupation of Bosnia-Herzegovina, who later hired him as an official advisor. He also served the Japanese, served the Ottoman Empire as well during wars. He was a close friend of Bulgarian Prime Minister Stambolov, and he was the professor of the Academy of Oriental Trade in Budapest and a founder of the Zionist movement in Hungary. But he published many scholarly works. For example, he is a national hero in Bulgaria. You can see in the top right corner, Béla Erődi, Adolf Strauss, the Bulgarska národna kultúra, because he collected folk songs in Macedonia, and while he was collecting folk songs, he also became a spy serving Bulgarian interests. On the top left, you can see the book of Strauss as a scientific product on the 1885 expedition. So, he became the agent of Prince Ferdinand of Bulgaria. We have hundreds of typewritten documents, as seen below here in German language, that were delivered to Ferdinand by Adolf Strauss. For example, a good question, who is going to be better joint minister of foreign affairs, Kallai or Goluhovsky? And there's 10 pages of analysis. He was a journalist and served the Hungarian opposition parties, not the Hungarian government. He was also a businessman, as the top left picture says. He tried to sell horses to Balkan countries, and during this he was able to provoke a revolt in Macedonia in 1904, a pro-Bulgarian movement indeed, while it was the era of the Mürsteg Agreement, so Austria-Hungary and Russia was working to secure peace of Macedonia, and this guy, Adolf Strauss, professor, a scholar in fact, provoked a revolt. And Vienna was very angry for this, and they made a deal. From then on, he also reported to Vienna, so became the secret agent of the Viennese circles. We have a dossier from him in the Presseleitung of Hofstaatsarchiv. The second guy who participated in this discussion, in this early discussion in 1885, is a well-known personality here in Serbia because he was the civil governor of occupied Serbia during the First World War. But he was official at the Hungarian National Archives. He was the director of the archives of the Viennese Court Chamber. He taught Hungarian history and public law at Theresianum, Hungarian public law at the Consular Academy. He was the corresponding member of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences and president of the Hungarian Historical Society. So there's a huge amount of scholarly work, which is circled, was written after one of the first trips in 1882. In fact, this is a scholarly work which was to promote Hungarian penetration, economic penetration into the Balkan Peninsula, but he did some other things during that time. Besides publishing scholarly works and a book on Levantine trade to promote Hungarian penetration, he initiated a revolt against the Ottomans to test the Austrian influence among Catholic Albanians. This is a well-known story. You can find the documents in the Haushofenstaatsarchiv Informationsbüro under the name of Stjepan Lemaic, that was the name of Tarlóci. And it is very important, very interesting that the scholarship usually considers it as a Hungarian initiative, a Hungarian act. But if you take a closer look at these two documents, it is evident that this trip was financed by Gustav von Kálnoky, Joint Minister of Finance, and Talóci reported to Benjamin Kallai, and whom did Kallai represent? This is another link to Christian's yesterday lecture. Was Kallai considered to be a representative of Hungary, or the Habsburg dynasty, or Austria-Hungary? Because from 1882 he's the governor of Bosnia and joint minister of finance. So it was not a Hungarian initiative, though Hungarians participated in this action, but it was welcomed by the Viennese authorities as well. In 1889, Talóci is in Serbia again as an observer of the renewal of the Austro-Hungarian-Serbian Agreement of 1881 and reports on the commemorations of the 500th anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo. It is well known, it was published by Harald Heppner, but he had several other trips, and I'm going to talk about this trip which was found incidentally. We have been collecting material to process the unpublished diary of István Burian, who was that time consul in Sofia, and later he became joint minister of finance and governor of Bosnia after Kallai. And I found an inscription in Burian's diary from 1887. Here was Talóci by his own admission as an imperial and royal mood detector. So it was not his personal invention initiative. It was an official trip. He was an official emissary, at least he stated that. And we didn't have any knowledge about this trip before this. And fortunately, accidentally, I managed to find this report in the above-mentioned Lemanic mission. So a report from 1887 was put into a box reporting from 1882, so it was an accident to find it. And what is more important, that beside this report on Bulgaria, we have a report on Serbia as well. This is the very time when the Hungarian opposition is fed up with Kálnoky's foreign policy and the Dreikaiserbund, and wants Russia to be expelled from the Balkan Peninsula, and several agents, politicians were sent there. So the Hungarian government was dissatisfied, the Hungarian opposition was also dissatisfied with Kálnoky's policy, and the Hungarian government tried to exploit the sentiment of the Hungarian opposition during the debates at the joint delegates to make a turn in Kálnoky's foreign policy. And this turn was supported by Adolf Strauss, who was sent as a journalist by the Hungarian opposition to Bulgaria. It was supported by Burian himself as a consul, who had a close friendship with Stambulov, and despite he was consul in Moscow, he did not appreciate Russia. And if we read out Talóci's report, Talóci also abandons Russia and proposes a closer ties with Bulgaria as well. This all means that the Serbian alliance for Austria-Hungary became less important. The question is why, and we have the clues in Talóci's report on the governmental crisis in 1887 in his account. So this is the document itself, written in German language. The documents, indeed there are 3 documents in this dossier. The first is an account on Vojvodina, what to do with the Serbian minority there. The second one is a report on Belgrade, the political situation, and the third one is the Bulgarian report. I here quoted some examples what to do with the Serbs in Hungary. For example, Talóci offers that the government should move the seat of the Serbian National Church from Karlovci to Budapest in order to secure a closer overlook over the Serbian Orthodoxy. He mentions that the education of the clergy is very bad, but there's one good thing to be said for the ecclesiastic system of Karlovci, that in the parishes and monasteries of Fruška the loyalty to the Hungarian state gradually grew stronger in these years. He also mentions that in the second document, that the real Serbian policy is to maneuver between the great powers, Russia and Austria, while protecting its special interest. And Talóci claims that it was one of Ristić's main goal, to protect Serbia's relation. And then comes a huge amount of problem that Austria's influence dominated Serbia until the most recent period. And what did this influence consist of? All sorts of businessmen of dubious origin, mostly of the hated Jewish faith, flooded the country. The Länderbank helped to worsen the state finances, A railroad was built for the Swabians, the Austria-Hungary, as from Serbian perspective, while of course the Prussia and the French entrepreneurs earned the profits from building the railway. Ganashanin bought an estate, the officials stole, Serbia was oppressed in trade, it was pushed into an unfortunate war with the Bulgarians. Of course it was saved by Austria, which everybody has already forgotten, but it is always Austria that is blamed for this, according to Tarlóci's account. And this can be given as a characteristic of the ruling public mood that time. The administration does not work, people didn't want to pay taxes, even the savings banks were not trusted because it was believed that the government will use these funds for state purposes well. The growing unpopularity of the king is added to this, whose generosity to Austria is viewed with shady eyes. He is reproached for every 10 francs he gives to the Swabian beggars, that is Austria. But despite of the many dissenting voices, the Ristich government doesn't seem to me to want to become a purely Russian government. Though the people are fed up with being considered as Austria's slaves, and they were glad to get rid of us, Ristich didn't hide this joy, but didn't particularly encourage the Russians to increase their influence in Serbia. His policy, as he told to Stoilov, one of the regents in Bulgaria, is to keep both neighbors away. That's why I understand Bulgarians, he said, that you hate the Russians. According to Tarlóci, Ristich did not take part in the intrigues and gossips in the royal family. When he comes to the questions that are very important for Austria-Hungary. The Serbian public opinion is expressed in the general demand that Bosnia should be united with Serbia. Then they naively add, let's leave Austria alone. Even more experienced elements regard Bosnia's occupation as a hereditary sin and diligently believed in the news spread by the Russians that Catholic propaganda is being carried out among the Orthodox in Bosnia and that will lead to revolution. Even though Bosnia is now so close to them, they know very little about the circumstances, and the people of the country, in Serbia, suppose a strict military regime in Bosnia, even as far as to Macedonia. But, according to Tarlóci, Ristich will play the idea of Greater Serbia only as a card. As a skillful player, he counts on the inattention of his partners, so it is a tactical element, not a main goal of this political course. The intimidated progressives, now with the completely silent Garashanin at their head, are expecting Ristich to commit a mistake. Let's just wait. And he's looking for allies in the press, hoping for the dissatisfaction of the radicals, whom he calls Cherkessen. But Ristich knows this just as well and trying to get along with them. This will be the probe of his regime. And some words, ironic words from Tarlóci when he talks to Ristich. He wants to enforce the neutralization of Serbia like Switzerland, that way eliminating the desire for war and averting the danger of Austrian occupation. And here comes the irony, the Slavic Piedmont as Switzerland, says the prefect of Zaječar. He is also not a stranger to the Balkan Confederation idea. However, it's necessary to settle the accounts with Turkey first, because Serbian and Bulgarian interests are intersecting in Macedonia. And finally, the relationship with the neighbors. Relations between Hungarian Serbs have improved remarkably, according to Tarlóci, and the antipathy between the two nations is on the wane. However, mutual hatred between Bulgarians and Serbs is all the more vivid. 1887. From Niš to Caribrod, the Bulgarian population is almost bitterly opposed to the Serbian government that has been established there. This is also noticeable in Macedonia. And I just quoted finally 3 lines from the Bulgarian report when he talked to the regents, Stambolov, Stoilov, on the chances of King Milan on the Bulgarian throne. The Bulgarians replied that they could accept Milan if he would Bulgarianize the Serbs. But anyway, he is not a welcome personality. So, the question naturally arises that this is not a scientific research at all. It is an official report, and that time in 1887, as we remember his CV, he was in Vienna. So the question is still open whether he carried out official instructions of Austrian-Hungarian diplomatists, at the time serving Hungarian interests, but this is a question of future research, I guess. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank to colleague